an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Goldenhand, chapters 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. Well Met by Moonlight, Dinner for Two plus One, An Unwelcome Sleep, Barking Owls and Nighttime Visitors, and Arrivals and Departures. Also, I will talk a little bit about the chapters that I missed in the last recording because I ran out of time. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Apologies to everybody for talking for so long last episode that I ran out of time and didn't really have a chance to cover the final. It was like the final probably like 10 pages out of the 50. And Yama, thank you very much for commissioning this episode and bearing with me as I go back a little bit. Chapter 21 really wasn't there, like I had said at the time, it was a lot of action, and so there wasn't quite as much to talk about. The Gore Crows show up. Those are always, like, I just love the idea of the Gore Crows and the fact that they are, like, all controlled by one spirit, which I feel like I forget every time until I'm reminded. And really the main event of that section is Swinther, who dies and like basically falls off of the side of, there's like an avalanche of rock, and Swinther falls off the edge of a cliff or is sort of like pushed off the edge. I think it's really more of a fall. And Swinther winds up being brought back to life by the necromancer that they are up against, which is really gross and horrifying. It's bad enough to use like undead servants, but to pick somebody up who just fell from the opposite side and use that person against that side just feels extra sort of mean-spirited to me. So that is like the main event of chapter 21. And then chapter 22, it's a lot of Lyriel wandering around the Abhorsen rooms, looking around at, like, you know, how sort of imposing and grand everything is, and it doesn't really seem to suit her or feel comfortable. She thinks about Mogget at one point, which I didn't realize that Mogget had just kind of, like, disappeared and nobody knew what was going on with him anymore. And she winds up, she like walks into the Abhorsen dining area, and there is a, I'm trying to think of the word for this. Like, ritual seems too formal, but they are trying to basically do like a magical operation on Nick, who's laid out on top of the table. And they've figured out that he can choose to invite the charter marks inside of him and make them more effective for his healing, which is pretty wild. And he can do it, but he's like clearly exhausted by it. You know, it's not something that's like, oh yeah, I'm just, I decided that I'm welcoming them in and now I'm fine. It's definitely an effort. It cost him something. He says like after this initial attempt, which isn't totally successful, by the way, he says that he feels like he's run a mile at the end of it. So, and in this chapter is also when Lyriel is given a sword that is very similar to her old sword, Nehima. And she's like kind of baffled at how similar it is. And I didn't realize, or maybe I just forgot, that Nehima, her old sword, is has sister swords. This one's called Ramina. And it says on the sword, like it flashes in when she picks it up, "Wallmakers made me to wield with wisdom and to wield well." And Lyriel says, I wonder how many sister swords of Nehima are still in this world, for Ramina must be one like Binder, the librarian's blade. So she gets that, and she gets a librarian's tunic, or it's not even a tunic, it's a vest with the emergency mouse and the whistle, and she gets one of the really throwback that I had totally forgotten about, one of the bracelets that has the stones on it, and each of the stones holds a spell that allows you to access higher level areas of the library. And her bracelet accesses all levels now, which is a considerable honor. And she seems very touched at the fact that they have given her, I mean, you know, she is somebody who wanted so bad to be one of the Claire, and then eventually realized that that was simply not what was going to happen for her. And to have this, like, this symbolic gesture of sisterhood, even though she isn't going to have the same abilities that they have, I think this was a very kind, tactful, and appropriately grand gesture from the Claire, especially considering that they like left her standing on the fucking doorstep basically for ages and didn't want to let her in. And it's not even like that simple that they didn't want to let her in, but in my opinion, she was not afforded the treatment that she should have, that should be expected. And I don't know if they like came up with this gift after the fact and they were like, we really need to do something to kind of make up for this. If they had it sort of like in storage waiting in case she came back, because they didn't see her coming. So it can't be that they like, you know, they were aware and they did this in preparation. Like it either was done last second or it was done ages back, one or the other. But yeah, so I don't know. I just really like, this was touching to me, even though I am not as invested in the whole, like, wanting to be a Claire thing as she is, you know, it's just something that for me, I am a fan of like being your own type of gifted. So the idea that she is not a Claire, but she does have her own really unique special ability, I thought that was like more than enough in terms of, you know, reaching her own potential. And I couldn't really understand or relate to her heartbreak at the fact that she isn't going to be one of the Claire ever. So I feel like even though I wasn't that worried about it, not the way she was, not as heartbroken about it as she was, I still really appreciated this gesture. But yeah, that's pretty much like all of what happens in those 2 chapters, I think. And then when we start chapter 23, we have Ferin and Laska, and there's one other, isn't there? I feel like, because Swinther died, but wasn't there 4 of them? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was just them 2. And they are, yeah, no, I think it is just them 2. I wonder why I thought that there was another. They are basically sprinting as much as they can in the total dark. And reminder, Ferin is really, really badly injured. So she is having to crawl a lot of the time. You know, her ankle gives way finally because she had been running on it despite all of the orders she was given to not fucking do that because the healing spell placed on her is very tenuous. And the crawling that she has to do after this is excruciating. I just can't emphasize enough what a nightmare this is. It's sort of like the dreams that you have where you can't run. you know, where you're trying to move and you can't move, or you're trying to scream and no sound comes out of your throat. It feels a little bit like that. Just how completely helpless she is, knowing that this thing is behind her. And also in that way of dreams, knowing it's behind her, knowing it's approaching, and being totally unable to see it as well. It's just a perfect storm of like horror, you know? This was really tense for me. And Ferin is realizing at this point that it is very likely she'll die. I have to say, as much as I talk a lot of smack about trying to be tough or whatever, it's really always kind of like I'm always impressed when there is a character who seems to fully embrace that they are going to die in an extremely practical manner. And Ferin is nothing if not practical. I mean, in the last section, when the healer is telling her, oh, I think that this symbol that they imbued you with, that tattoo or brand, I think it was a brand, right? This is keeping the charter magic from taking hold and healing you. Ferin's response to this news is to pull a dagger and get ready to cut the mark off herself. And like, I'm not trying to say that she wouldn't have been in pain. She knows that she would have been in pain. But the fact that she is so immediately ready to do that is bonkers to me. And like, such respect, right? Like, I really, that is what I want in a character is, you know what needs to be done. Belly aching about it is not going to change the fact that it needs to be done, and you're on a fucking schedule right now. So please shut up, stop whining about it, and just do what needs doing. And I love that Ferin is like that. And it has to, you know, the healer thankfully stops her, because it turns out that like messing with this thing will cause some sort of reaction that she hadn't anticipated. But yeah, here she's just realizing like, oh my God, I am not going to be able to make it out of this. So I need to pass the message on to Laska so that at least if I die, the message gets out. She spoke the message as she had memorized it, line by line, words spilling out between the sharp cracking of shale, the terrible sound of stones slipping under feet, the racking gasps of her breath, and always the sound of the dead hands getting closer and closer, the repulsive ratchet of bone on bone, the wet plop of pieces of rotten flesh falling, jarred loose by the creature's passage. Y'all, you know how much I hate being reminded of the wet plop of rotten flesh. Garth, you didn't need to do that, buddy. Come on. Come on. Why you always got to do this to me? It's so nasty. And Laska, she's like, you know, obediently listening and everything. And Ferin's like, okay, do you got that? And Laska's like, yeah, I got it. So are we going to go or what? And Ferin's like, I'm just slowing you down. And Laska says, shut the fuck up and let's go. And honestly, these two as a team, pretty great. So there is a moment here. Laska reaches into the charter. She had the strength for only one spell, but it was a trusted one drilled into all the borderers. They learned to cast it even when wounded or utterly exhausted or both. A spell of last resort. She found the marks almost instantly, gathered them into hand and mouth, the use names of the marks that would make them active rising up in her mind like fish to a lure. The closest dead hand sprang at Ferin as young Laska unleashed her spell. Silver blades flew from the borderer's outstretched fingers, striking the hand at neck, groin, and knees. Golden fire exploded around the gaping wounds they caused, but still the dead hand came on, clawed hands reaching for Ferin, who dodged aside, hacking with her knife. The hand continued past her, staggering away, the spirit within unable to control the body, but unable to leave it either, until the charter spell blades dissipated and the gold flames died. The other two dead hands stepped out onto the road, cautious now, both moving toward Ferin, one from left, one from right. And Alaska is like, okay, so I'm going to need to do this again. Like that, it really took a minute for it to set in. And I think I don't know if it's that she hasn't been up against the dead in a while, and so she underestimates the power she should imbue it with. I don't know if it's that she's out of practice, because she says later that or she says earlier, I think, that she used light to fuel like her archery at one point, and that took a lot more energy than it should have, and that the other borderers would have laughed at her if they knew how completely exhausted she was by it. So I'm wondering if that's part of it. She's just like out of energy. But she's trying to assemble this spell again. And the two charter marks that she has gathered, when she's trying to get the third one, she literally passes out. And the mark like falls out of her mouth, the two of them. Because it's so weird to me when they call charter marks to know that that's like something that's literally happening visibly. Whenever it's said in the text, I imagine it as a metaphor, like they are bringing to mind the charter mark. But I have to remember that like we see charter marks moving in items. We see charter marks flowing to create sendings. We see charter marks being released by objects that, like, you know, I think at one point when they are when they're looking at unfurled like rigging, like on the mast or something, that there's like charter marks coming off it, or maybe it's coming, you know what I'm thinking of, the whistling that Lyriel does, and she whistles to control the paper wing, and there are actual charter marks coming out of her mouth. And I just have a really hard time with that visual in my mind, and forget about it because it doesn't make a ton of sense to my brain. And so I sort of let it go until I'm reminded of it. So she falls down, and the dead hand that's about to come at her doesn't expect her to fall, and sort of like had been coming at her upright, and it goes right over her. And it says, a rope looped around its neck, pulled back, and yanked its head right off. And there's like a sort of explosion of golden fire, and the healer is there, and so is Megrel, who is the constable. And Astilarin, who is the healer, says, we came to scout. And, you know, we didn't come back here for you guys. We came to see what was going on. We didn't realize that it had gotten this bad. And they ask about Swinther, and she has to tell them that he fell and his body was used by the necromancer. So we cut from there back to Lyriel. And Lyriel is starving, very excited for the dinner that they are about to feed her. And I really enjoy Imshi being like, all right, so I'm going to let you two have some dinner together. Just because I've eaten already. It's no big deal. Like, she clearly knows that I would love to be able to see the two of them and see how incredibly obvious it is. But she clearly knows that Lyriel has a thing for Nicholas, and is just like being a real good wingman and giving them some space, and it's precious. Honestly, I really, really enjoy it. It's such a silly thing to, like, still, after as old as I am, to still giggle about romances and people who like each other but don't want to say that they like each other, you know. But honestly, if it's done well, and if it's done in such a way that, like, it feels everybody but the characters themselves are perfectly aware, there is something way more funny about that to me. So she takes off, and let's see. Oh yeah, here it is. There's a moment where she asks about, and by she, I mean Imshi. She says, did you know there's even a wine cellar here? Lots of famous old wine. I'm surprised no one's tried to requisition it, though I suppose it is the Abhorson's, not like normal property. And then we get an explanation that I found kind of interesting. The Clare typically had very few personal possessions, but could requisition anything they needed from the common stock. Such requisitions were governed by a relatively informal code policed by one's peers, unless the requisitioning got out of hand and higher authorities needed to become involved. This was rare, but it did happen from time to time. When Lyriel was a child, she remembered the shame-faced Jassafel having to carry back more than 1,000 pieces of soap, 1 bar at a time, held above her head so all would know. I am absolutely enraptured at the weirdness of this story. I assume that she was carrying back those 1,000 pieces of soap because she literally stole 1,000 pieces of soap. However, it is possible that what actually happened is she stole a few bars of soap and they caught her and were like, oh, this bitch thinks what? And they just decided to have her carry back 1,000 bars in order to draw out the humiliation, and that she hadn't stolen anywhere near that number, but that was what they decided was an appropriate thing to do to punish her. And honestly, like, you know, none of my business. I don't care either way, but I would kind of just like to know the answer just out of curiosity, because the Clare don't strike me as particularly vindictive types, but the Clare are made up of actual human people, and human people can be vindictive, and maybe that is a thing. Maybe this is something that was sort of put in place at a previous time, you know, and they were just carrying out the tradition of you steal one thing and we're going to have you carry thousands of that thing past everybody so that they all know. Either way, I imagine that is a very effective deterrent. The combination of the person themselves experiencing that humiliation and not wanting to fuck around with that again, and also the fact that there's like a when you watch that as a child, I would imagine that shit makes a huge impression on you, you know, and you just realize that what you are going to be risking should you decide to do something like that. So yeah, I am extremely, I would really like to know more about the way that the Clare live, because we got such an odd view of it because of seeing everything through Lyriel's eyes. Lyriel is somebody who doesn't really belong. She was extremely preoccupied with how she wanted things to be versus how things actually were. And a big part of me wonders, like, how much can her point of view really be trusted in this whole thing? And by this whole thing, I mean, like, her recounting her childhood with the Clare. And we don't even get a ton of detail about that. We get a good amount of detail of her time as a librarian. But by the time we meet up with her, things have really moved on, you know? So anyway, I don't know. I just, there's a lot about the world here that I would like to know more about. And it's not crucial or anything. It's just out of my own curiosity. So they are eating together. And I love that, he mentions something about mash and she doesn't know what it is. And he tries to show her how to make mashed potatoes. And I really liked the conversation. Like, Nick is sort of like me, where he's trying to get a handle on what they've got here versus what they don't. He doesn't have a good sense of it either. He says something about how it feels sort of medieval, which I found kind of interesting that he uses the word medieval, because I wasn't even sure that that was like, you know, we have that period in history in our universe, but I wasn't sure if that was something that existed in his universe. So I just kind of, who knows? And she mentioned something about how there were like color plates in a book that she read, which they're printed drawings. And he is brought up a little short and is like, oh, okay, well, I didn't even know that you guys had printing. So that's good to know, I guess. But also, and yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. It feels rather inconsistent at times. And I don't mean the world building. I just mean as an outsider, when you begin to feel like you've gotten a hold of how things work, and then you find out that something that feels sort of modern like that is part of the world, it's got to be a little bit just disorienting and surprising. So I just liked him asking these questions because this feels like a real conversation that people would have. And, you know, they have a little bit of a talk about this. The mashed potatoes, he tries to make the potato go shooting out from underneath his fork and hits a wine glass, and the wine glass just rings. It doesn't break, but it's a wonderful little moment because right before he does that, she nearly dropped her plate and obviously was feeling a little bit self-conscious about it. And I love the fact that he immediately kind of fucks up himself. When she fucks up, he makes it clear that he's not laughing at her. He is giggling at the fact that, you know, they are both kind of a mess right now. But I like this as like a moment for the two of them, that they are really, each of them is, they're not on their best game. They're both tired. They're both a little nervous being around each other. They're both in an unfamiliar place. Like everything is just kind of a mess. Oh, Yama says, I'm popping here real quick just to say I warned you about the audiobook. I feel like I did my part. Can't stay. Love you. Love you too, Yama. Thank you. And yeah, you did warn me, guys. The audiobook is real bad. Like there are times where I have to listen to it in order to, you know, for whatever reason, but I didn't for this section. I read for this section. So, all right. This. So then we have the two of them sitting together. And he is looking at her. Let's see, their conversation turned to friends. They start talking about the disreputable dog. He can tell that she's like kind of saddened by it. So he changes the subject to talk about Sam. They begin to discuss what happened with his hand or her hand, and Nick takes up her hand and looks at it. It says, as he lifted her hand, the marks grew brighter on her fingers, and some blossomed on Nick's skin as well, seeming to emerge from deep within his flesh. Both of them felt the sudden presence of the charter everywhere about them, as if instead of them falling into the charter, as happened when touching a baptismal mark, it was about to fall on them like some great irresistible wave. Nick's grip loosened and his eyes flickered anxiously, but Lyrio closed her hand so he could not let go. No, she said quietly. Hold on. This is your power manifesting. Relax. Let the charter wash over us. I do not think it will be harmful. Nick gulped, but tried to follow her instructions. He found himself looking into her eyes, and for once, Lyrio didn't lower her head and let her hair fall across her face. He grew calmer, though he could still feel the pressure of the charter, all those millions and millions of marks all around and through him. In the corner of his vision, he could see them, too, or almost see them. So many, it was as if the room was misted with some golden gas. A great weight of magic was building around them both, drawn to the other energies he could feel deep inside himself, the free magic. Nick wondered with sudden fear if this manifestation of the charter was indeed like a flood, building up to rush in and snuff out the very strange fire within his blood and bone, to quench forever that legacy of Uranus, which surely would also kill him. I wanted to see you again, said Nick hurriedly, suddenly feeling that if he didn't speak now, he might never have the opportunity. I wanted to ever since Forward Mill, perhaps from before then, though that time is like a dream. I wanted to see you too, said Lyrio. I'm not very... I don't find it easy to talk, let alone... But I hoped you liked me. I do, said Nick. When you came in tonight, You are very beautiful, Lyriel. I am? Yes, but you like me? Despite everything? Everything. Nick shrugged unhappily. Uranus and Hedge, I helped them. That wasn't your fault. It was the shard of the destroyer within you. It is amazing you survived at all. But then there was the creature in the case, continued Nick, the Hrul. I actually made it stronger. If you hadn't come when you did, it would have killed dozens, maybe hundreds of people. You tried to do something, said Lyriel. That is better than doing nothing. And the Hrul is imprisoned under earth, and you are here. We are here, said Nick. He smiled, his whole face lighting up. We are here, together. Yes, said Lyriel. She was smiling too, a tide of happiness rising inside her, like the bubbles of her wine glass streaming to the surface. But you should know, I don't know what to do. I mean, next. Nick smiled and leaned across the table, and they kissed. And at that moment, the charter marks that had saturated the room, building to some imminent conclusion, simply vanished. There were just two young people kissing across a table, one with his elbow on a piece of leftover eel, and the other with her left hand in a pile of salt from the knocked-over salt cellar. Oh, you guys. I'm so glad that they are, just coming forward and being honest with each other right now, and I really enjoy this. And of course, who has to fucking interrupt than Aunt Kirith? And let me tell you, Lyriel has no goddamn time for Kirith. This bitch is really fucking riding high on her borrowed title of the voice of the 9-Day Watch, which we find out a little bit later she pretty much only got because she kept on whining about the fact that she felt unappreciated. And the whole, the honor of it was bestowed because they were sort of certain that enough of a quiet period had descended upon them that they didn't need somebody particularly competent in the position. That's really when they get down to it, what it was, oh yeah, we have some time here that we can give to anybody, regardless of the fact that they might not be good at the job, because there's nothing of immediate importance happening. And we find out that that is not actually true. That's what they thought, but they were mistaken. So Kirith comes in. She really thinks that she's going to impress them with this title. She wants to hug Lyriel in a sort of performative moment of oh, I missed you so much, to which Lyriel is absolutely not going to participate. She puts a chair between the two of them because she knows that Kirith doesn't actually care about her, but for some reason always likes performing these little moments. And Kirith calls Nicholas the Curiosity, I think, something like that. I'm trying to find the spot where she says it. Allow me to Curio. That's what she calls her. And you must be the curio for the librarians to look at. And Nicholas takes that very good-naturedly, but it's Lyriel who steps forward and is he's a person, and by the way, here's his name. So she is trying to give one of the sending's orders to bring her wine, and the sending doesn't move. And it's not until Lyriel, I didn't understand it either initially, that the sending doesn't respond. But it turns out that these sendings are all for the Abhorsen household here and do not respond to anybody but somebody from the Abhorsen family. And she does not like that at all, let me tell you. She says, because she said her first assumption is that the sendings are so old that they don't respond. And when Lyriel says it will not answer to any of the Clare, Kirith says, I am not just any of the Clare, which just, yeah, you are though. And she says something about how the observatory was so badly organized because of the people who got sick, and that they should just put their minds to it and get over it, which like is one of those things that sounds almost cartoonish in how foolish it is. But I have known people who believed this sort of thing, so I know how genuine this sort of attitude actually is. And Lyriel like looks over at Nick, and he gives her a tiny little eyebrow raise at one point, a conspiratorial look of like, is this bitch for real? And she has to control herself to not laugh, because she is like, really, it's a combination of wanting to laugh because there's somebody there who understands how bullshit this all is, and she just wants to go and make out with him a little bit longer because they definitely got interrupted during their first kiss, and that's just not fair. So then Kirith says something about how, can you believe that there are free magic beasts attacking our villages? And Lyriel is like brought right back to earth and goes, wait, what the fuck are you talking about? And Kirith is telling her that it's happening, like, you know, at Yellow Sands. And of course, Lyriel assumes that this is something that they saw happening in the future. But Kirith says that it's happening right now, or at the very latest, like tomorrow. And Kirith says that they sent message hawks. I'm sure Sabriel will be back soon enough to sort them out, although we haven't seen that yet. I find it really interesting that Sabriel does wind up showing up, indeed, manages to do something here, but she isn't seen. I'm wondering what's going on with the Claire, that their sight seems to be so obstructed lately. And Lyriel says the Abhorsen is on holiday. It's up to me right now to handle all of this stuff. To which Kirith says, don't be silly, you're too young, and calls her the Abhorsen in training, which is not her actual title. And the like sheer fucking audacity of this bitch telling her you're too young after she did what she did is just beyond the pale. Like, bitch, what do you fucking sit down? Jesus Christ. And she is like refusing to tell Lyriel because she says it's none of her business. And Lyriel finally has to be like, if you don't fucking tell me what's going on, I will kick you the fuck out and I will go find somebody who will tell me because you are useless. And finally, she agrees. At the end of the rambling discourse, Lyriel possessed the information that perhaps a dozen woodweirds, attendant shamans, witches, and keepers were raiding Yellow Sands. All of it was taking place right now, or had already taken place earlier that night. Nick watched Lyriel. She was furious, he could tell, but also deeply intent on the details. It soon became clear to him that she planned to go to Yellow Sands as soon as she could, and he became very worried. Yeah, I'm super glad that this isn't what winds up happening, by the way, because, like, they had just gotten here. I was so frustrated at how long it takes for her to get admitted into the glacier. And if she had turned around and left right away, it was like a combination of me being like, no, but you need to stay and, like, see through whatever's happening here. But also, like, I really felt their exhaustion, and I was reacting to her wanting to leave as if it were me who had just arrived, just had a big meal, just like, you know, said that I cared about this guy who said he cared back, just had a big bath and was like about to maybe be able to like go to bed. And now I have to stay up all night and make this fucking charter skin. I was just really tired secondhand. And I can't tell you how like weirdly relieved I was at the fact that she doesn't wind up having to head out the way that she expected. This, though, coming back to this conversation, when Kirith finishes telling her everything, Lyriel says, very well, you may go. And Kirith is like, who the fuck are you telling me what to do? I'm the voice. But she then stands up and says, I choose to leave. You should be grateful I didn't send you word. I was looking after you, keeping you out of danger. And it's such a complete lie. Like, this bitch did not try to protect her. She underestimated Lyriel. It had nothing to do with caring about Lyriel. She just, and I love how it says, and during the course of her recitation and Lyriel's occasional but important questions, it seemed to have penetrated her self-obsession that she had made a major mistake. And though she might be the voice for another 5 days, she most likely never would be again. And honestly, that is some satisfying shit. I want so much for this humiliation to be like more public, and I'm hoping it does become so, because based on the way that I can't remember who it is that comes and speaks to Lyriel a little bit later, but they tell her about how like Kirith got a message and put it in her sleeve rather than filing it with them, which we'll get to, but damn. And she kisses Nick after Kirith leaves and kind of is like, dude, I'm really sorry, but this is part of the job. And I was glad that she gives him another kiss really quick before she runs off. So we go back to Ferin, and they are with, I think this is why I thought there were more of them, because I forgot that Estelaran doesn't meet up with them until a little bit later. Let's see. They ran more slowly, and eventually there is this ringing sound, and we wind up finding out that it is, I think, Serenath, but it's a bell that makes you go to sleep. And it makes you go to sleep in complete, like, comfort. There's a sweetness to it of going to sleep after being exhausted and feeling like pleasantly ready for bed. And I don't think I realized that was the effect that it had. It doesn't just send you to sleep like suddenly you're overcome with tiredness. It sends you to sleep in a way that makes your reaction like, oh God, oh, this is so nice. Which, as somebody, and I'm sure many of you can relate, who has experienced deep fatigue before, that is way more insidious to me. I find that to be very upsetting somehow, that like you can be sent into that particular state, which I would think is sort of something that most of us see as a state that you have to earn by like tiring yourself out. And that's just a much more like, it takes the worry out of it. She's not falling asleep going, oh God, I have to stay awake. I have to stay awake. There's danger. I need to stay awake. That doesn't come into her head at all. She's just kind of like, oh, this looks like a good spot. I'm really tired. And then just lays down and doesn't even think about it, which that really upsets me. So let's see. Megrel charged up the road, hoping for the faint chance of surprise. She saw the necromancer, the small bell in his hand. The keeper behind him dropped the silver chain to take her bow from her back, not bothering to grab an arrow because she already had a spirit glass shaft in her left hand. Megrel was only a dozen paces away when the spirit glass arrow hit her in the chest. Free magic exploded through the protection of even charter-spelled steel, and the bloodied arrow came clear out her back. Somehow, Megrel continued on another 2 or 3 steps, even lifting her sword as if to strike. Garner her spirit, instructed the keeper, bending to pick up the chain again. She yawned as she did so and cast a sudden look at the necromancer. Spare me the bell's attention. And it turns out, I didn't quite realize the animosity between the necromancer and their keeper. But basically, the necromancers are enslaved by these people. And so when he sees this moment to be able to get free, he fucking takes it. And she slumps down, and he slits her throat with her own knife, and then decides that he is going to go into death and bring her spirit back under his control, because he knows that there are ways to torture the dead if you know how, which he does. And he is eager to do this to repay some of the shit that she did to him. And I gotta tell you guys, did not like this. This fucked me up. I don't know what twisted mind was like, oh, you know what I'll do? I'll make death the best escape, no escape at all. But that is rude. And I sort of love the way this winds up, because what happens is he's overeager to get his revenge, and so allows his body to remain unprotected as he goes into death. Normally, this is what his handlers, his keepers, would do for him. They would manage, like, overseeing his body and making sure that he was okay. But instead, he has to just hope for the best and go down into death and leave himself completely exposed. And that shit goes quite wrong for him. He tries to come back to his body, and he does manage just before he actually dies. But I don't know if they did this on purpose or if this was just a good coincidence, but they got him through the throat first, so that when he comes back to his body, his first instinct is to try and say a spell, but he can't talk because the sword is right through his throat, so it doesn't wind up working out. And I would like to think that that was by design, that they totally knew what he was going to attempt to do. They've dealt with this before and they just stopped him. I don't know though, it might not be that much foresight there. So we have a sergeant and lieutenant, and I didn't really put together what I should have, which is that these people being here herald the fact that Sabriel is also here. But they decide to let them deal with the necromancer bells and everything, because there's so much free magic on those bells that nobody even wants to touch them. And let's see. So we'll get back to that because we cut to chapter 26 to Lyriel. And she has, this sounds so great. The sendings led her to the actual Abhorsen's bedroom, which was not only twice the size of the others, but also had a ridiculously large and ornate bed that had 8 posts, each corner featuring a double column of ornately carved and gilded timber. The ludicrously fat mattress must have needed the feathers of several hundred geese, and the bedspread was fringed with silver tassels and had an enormous Abhorsen key, some 6 feet by 3 paces, embroidered in silvery seed pearls. That is intense. That's just, I would love to see an illustration of this because it's hard for me to even picture. So she has gotten her bags packed. She is literally ready to go. And she's saying thank you to Ascending before she goes and gets her charter skin all together. There were several folded items of clothing on top of a leather satchel. Lyriel picked a top piece and shook it out, puzzled to see a long hooded robe. A few fading charter marks hung in the close weave of the unfamiliar cloth, and she thought it once would have been completely saturated with marks. There were also 2 elbow-length gloves of the same material in the pile, and under them, a bronze mask. Lyriel felt her heart race as she lifted the gloves and saw it, and she sprang back, suddenly wary, for it was Clor's mask. But after a moment of rising panic, which she fought down, Lyriel realized it was not Clor's mask, though it could have been made by the same hand. This one had fading charter marks drifting through the metal. Once it, too, would have been deeply imbued with charter magic. She set aside the mask and examined the satchel that held 3 metal bottles with stoppers of solid silver and armatures of gold wire ready to twist around to seal the bottles shut to imprison free magic creatures. These were all part of some long ago Abhorsen's equipment for dealing with free magic creatures. but dealing with them in a much closer and more involved way than Sabriel ever did or had spoken of to Lyriel. They had not talked much about free magic creatures. The more powerful were very rare and had to be forced beyond the boundaries of the kingdom. These old bottles and protective clothing suggested past Abhorsons might have kept their free magic prisoners closer to use them in some way, perhaps even in a similar fashion to the sorcerers who were their eternal foes. That's interesting, and I wonder what she thinks of this. She doesn't really get a lot of time to, like, parse what that really means, you know? So she works on the charter skin. About 3 hours later, she is just exhausted, and she realizes, I am going to have to sleep for at least a little while, and tells the sending to give her an hour and then come and wake her up. It was not the sending that woke her, and it wasn't in an hour. First there came an urgent knocking, which came through to her as a dream of carpentry. I find that really funny. So finally, Senar, who is one of the Clare, it turns out, has woken her up. And I love this. Kirith says that she has influenza and that Sanar is the voice again. Interesting. It was hard to make sense of what some of Kirith told me, so I had to go back through all of the last week's messages. And I had to assemble some sort of watch from at least, from at least half well people to try for some meaningful visions, which we have just done. And Sanar says, you don't need to go anywhere. The sorcerers went back in their ship with the Woodweirds and are gone. The necromancer has been dealt with, and Sabriel and the king are flying to Yellow Sands at dawn. We didn't see that, by the way. A message hawk came in just before sundown last night, but Kirith didn't file the message. She just put it up her sleeve. And I love how, like, dismayed Lyriel is at the fact that these two aren't getting their vacation. She really felt like this was her time to shine. And now she's gonna, she really feels like she let them down, and she didn't. This is a big deal. Even if she had handled it, if they had heard about it, I think they still would have, like, dropped everything and come, because they would. This kind of incident happening is unusual enough. This isn't just like, some undead creatures roaming around. This is something, like, organized by a group of people and dealing with, like, another culture that they don't really have a lot of communication with, as far as we know. So I think that this would have seemed way too important for them to just let Lyriel handle and stay, on their vacation. And Sanar tells Lyriel that they are going to be coming to the glacier. And she says that they're going to be bringing a girl with them, a young woman from the far mountains beyond the steppe who has had a very hard road indeed. And I love when Lyriel is told that she can go back to sleep after all. She's laying there thinking about how there's room in this bed for Nick if he wanted to come and join her. Girl, yes. Good on you. 2 words penetrated as Sanar kept talking while Lyriel fell asleep. Your mother. And she wakes right back up again and is like, but wait, I thought she was dead. And Sanar is like, yeah, she is, but she was a very strong Clare, and they think that she passed on some kind of message, and that is part of what this girl is being sent to tell us about. And Sanar says something to Lyriel about how she thinks Lyriel's mother would be proud of her. And also mentions that Nick is very handsome. And Lyriel's like, yes, and he's getting more handsome as he recovers. And also, it's not just about that. And I just, I'm hoping that turns into, like, I honestly am invested in her and Nick because I liked Nick so much right from the start, so I'm all about it. So then we go to chapter 27, and this is Ferin having more fucking nightmares. This poor girl cannot get a break. And she wakes up, she's got a cut in her gut that she doesn't remember. And she looks down and her fucking foot is gone. She had to have her foot amputated. It turns out she thought that it was like blood poisoning, but it was something like that, except magical, that was going to work to corrupt the rest of her body. And I don't know, y'all, if I am just forgetting that this is a thing. Have we seen that kind of thing before that slowly works to completely change somebody while they're still alive? I don't think that I knew that was possible, and I am not a fan of any of this. But Sabriel comes in here, and Ferin keeps trying to really like be super cash about the fact that she's talking to the queen. And later when she's riding in the paper wing and she finds out that the king is flying the other one, she tries to be like really unimpressed, but she can't help but be pretty startled at the company she's suddenly keeping. I like it. And I also like the fact that when Sabriel speaks, she says something about how Sabriel has the voice of like a very strong witch, which I'm sure Sabriel takes as a huge compliment. And Ferin offers to pay money to settle the debt of the people who died. You know, what's his name? I've already forgotten his name. Swinther, that's it. And at first, one of them, I'm not remembering one, I think it might be the sergeant, tries to argue with her and be like, no, oh, it's a Stellarin. That's right. He says like it's not necessary for you to pay. But Sabriel stops him and is like, no, let's take it. And I wonder what that was about. Like, does she feel that the family really needs the money? Does she feel that Ferin would insist either way and we may as well? Does she think it would offend Ferin to be turned down here? But either way, I kind of like the fact that Sabriel's like, yeah, we'll take your fucking gold. That's fine. And they talk about dragons for a second. Neither of them have actually seen a dragon. And she says that let's see, a witch of the Athesk had one in her service, or so the tales tell. The only thing like a dragon we have seen in these books is in the last book, Clariel, when she, like, one of the free magic creatures turns itself into a dragon-looking thing. But it's not actually a dragon. Like, that's not its real form. So I don't feel like that really counts. And they ask her, do you want to tell us your message? But she's like, well, you know what? I already gave the message to Laska. So if I die, it's out there for somebody to get anyway. But since I am in better care and I feel safer now, I think I'm just going to wait and actually give the message to Lyriel like I was instructed to do directly, because I feel like I'm going to finally actually make it for a change. And they are all completely like understanding of that and prepared to just let that be how she handles it. Let's see. Oh, and I like this moment. Sabriel is very interested in the fact that Ferin is an offering and wants to know more about the witch with no face. And Sabriel finally has to stop asking questions because Ferin literally grows hoarse from talking too much. And they are able to pile her pretty like quickly into the paper wing, and she's looking around and thinking about how she could shoot like some of the birds, and she kind of wants to, but she knows that'll make Sabriel mad, and she absolutely does not want to displease Sabriel. And then there's a moment that I rather liked. First there's two. First is she wonders how they survive inside the glacier, and then immediately dismisses that question from her mind because she knows that she's going to find out in a moment. So she doesn't spend any time doesn't waste any time wondering about a thing that she will be finding out very shortly. But the other thing that I really like is that she gets out of the paper wing and looks at the king and queen and realizes like how much older than her they are and how much they have done and are still very much in their prime, and hopes that she can be like them at some point. And it says, it did not occur to Ferin that this was the first time she had ever thought of a real future for herself, one that extended beyond the present day or perhaps the next. And I really like that moment. You know, that's the end of the chapter. And I like being reminded that Ferin's life wasn't for her. And now she's looking at a potential that's very different from what she had thought was her lot in life. And that's a very hopeful thing. So, all right, I am going to wrap up, but thank you again, Yama, for commissioning this episode and for popping into the chat. I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage, and I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.